Hello and welcome to the Agile Innovation Leaders podcast. I'm Ola Ojako. On this podcast, I speak with world-class leaders and doers about themselves and a variety of topics spanning agile, lean innovation, business, leadership, and much more, with actionable takeaways for you, the listener. It's my honor to introduce my guest for this episode. He is Dave West. Dave is the CEO of Scrum.org, and prior to joining Scrum.org as CEO, he led the development of the Rational Unified Process, also known as RUP, with IBM. He was also Chief Product Officer for Tasktop Technologies and Managing Director of the Americas at Ivar Jacobson Consulting. He is a widely published author of several articles and research reports, as well as the books, The Nexus Framework for Scaling Scrum and Headfirst Object-Oriented Analysis and Design. In this conversation, Dave talked about growing up in the Kansas estates, being raised by his grandparents who were of great positive influence in his life, especially his grandmother. He also talked about navigating the challenges of being dyslexic, especially as a student in secondary school, with the silver lining being that he got introduced to computers. Dave also gave his perspective on one of the ongoing Agile wars, quote unquote, on the concept of projects and whether they still have a place in Agile or not. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, my conversation with Dave. I am sure you would find it very, very interesting, relevant, and insightful. Thanks again for listening. So we have on this episode of the Agile Innovation Leaders podcast, Dave West, who is the CEO of Scrum.org. Dave, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for making the time.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me. I'm glad we've finally managed to make the time to do this. It's great to talk to you.
Yeah, well, the honor is mine. Let's start by talking about, getting to know about the man, Dave. Can you, tell us a bit about that? And
yeah, I'll try not to bore your audience. So I was brought up on a council estate in a little town called Market Harborough, just outside Leicester. I was one of my grandparents, and which has definitely, my grandmother has definitely shaped who I am, I think, which is fantastic. So I got into computers sort of a little bit by accident. I'm dyslexic, and I found school, particularly secondary school, very challenging. I don't know if any of your audience has had a similar experience, but I went from a very protected environment in secondary school as oh my gosh, it's like an experience that could scare any human being. And so my dyslexia really was a challenge there. And there was a teacher at secondary school called Phil Smith. He drove a sports car. He was sort of like that young,
cool.
sort of, those teachers that you remember from school that are the good looking young ones. And he ran a computer lab, and it had, RS-236. It had these really old well, now we would look at them, they were brand new at the time, computers, and some BBC Model A's and some other things. And I helped him, and he gave me a lot of time in the lab, and it was my sort of like escape. So I got very into computing and helped him and helped other teachers who were rubbish, I'm not going to lie, with computing. So that allowed me then, I managed to survive school, went to a further education college called Charles Keene, where I did a computing course, so not traditional A-levels and all of that, and then got into Huddersfield, that was a poly at the time, became a university whilst I was there. And I think that gave me a great opportunity. It was a fantastic university. It was a very practical course. my dyslexia became less of an issue because of, you know, word processing, I'll be honest. And, you know, the ability for it to read back, even though it was an awful read back, it was like listening to, you know, so like an old fashioned Stephen Hawking, you know, sort of, and then, yeah, got me a job at Commercial Union, which then led to me doing a master's, which then led me to move to London, all this sort of stuff. The adventure was great. The thing about, I guess, my journey is that I was driven at a certain point. I became very driven by the need to improve the way in which we delivered software development at that time. And that led me through my master's and, you know, object oriented, and then to a company called Rational Software, where I became the product manager for RUP, the Rational Unified Process. Now, for the bit agilists, the agilists on listening, they're probably like, "Oh, boo, hiss," and that's totally legit. It was, in fact, that's when I first met Ken Schwaber, and he told me I was an idiot, which turns out he was right. Ken Schwaber, the creator, who I work for now.
Anyways, we know Ken. I mean, who wouldn't know Ken Schwaber if you're a self-respecting agilist? Sorry, go on, please.
Yeah, he's an interesting character for sure. Anyway, so I was the RUP product manager, and I realized I went to this large insurance company in the Midwest, and it's a huge organization. And I met this lady, and she said, "I'm a use case." I said, "What do you do?" She said, "I'm a use case specifier." And meet my friend, she's a use case realizer. And I'm like, no, that's not the intent. And so I realized that there was this process that I loved, and I still definitely love elements of it, but that was fundamentally flawed in terms of helping actually people to work together to work on complex problems and solve them. So that, you know, and I'd written a book, and I'd done some other things on the way to this point, but this point really did make me realize that I was going wrong, which was a little scary, because RUP was incredibly popular at that time. And so then that led me to work with Ivar Jakobsen, try to bring in Scrum to the unified process. That spent more time with Ken Schwaber, who'd finally realized I may still be an idiot, but I was an idiot that was willing to listen to him. Then I ended up at Forrester Research running the application development practice. I became a research director there, which was super interesting, because I spent a lot of time looking at organizations, and I realized a really fundamental problem that I think probably will resonate with many that are listening to this podcast, that people were doing Scrum. Yeah, Scrum was incredibly popular, and people were doing Scrum, but they were doing it in an industrial context. It was more like Water-Scrum-Fall. And I coined that term in a research document, which got picked up by the InfoQ and all these magazines. And it became this sort of thing, Water-Scrum-Fall. You know, they were doing Scrum, but they only like to plan once a year. And there's this huge planning sort of routine that they did. They were doing Scrum, but they rarely released, because the customers really don't want it. It's incredibly hard and dangerous, and things can go horribly wrong. And so they were doing Scrum, but they weren't really doing Scrum, you know? And so that was super interesting. And I got an opportunity to do a number of workshops and presentations on the sort of like the solution to this Water-Scrum-Fall problem with Ken. I invited him, and we did this very entertaining roadshow, which I'm surprised we weren't arrested during it, but it was a really interesting experience. I then decided, like any good practitioner, I had to do a startup. So I went to Tasktop, working with Mick Curson and the gang at Tasktop. And the great thing about Tasktop was it was a massive fire hose of doing Scrum, trying to make payroll, learning about everything around delivering a product in a market that wasn't really there and that we had to build. And it was just fantastic, working with a lot of OEMs, a lot of partners, and looking at and then we got funding. We grew to 5 teams. I was running product and engineering. And Ken was continually talking to me through this time, and mentoring me, coaching me. But I realized he was also interviewing me. So he then said to me one day, "Dave, I don't want to be the CEO of Scrum.org anymore. I'd like you to be. When can you start? Ken doesn't take no for an answer. And I think that's part of the success of Scrum. I think that his persistence, his tenacity, his sort of energy around this was the reason why Scrum, part of the reason him and Jeff, had different skills, but definitely both had that in common, was successful. So I then came and joined about 7 years ago, Scrum.org, to run Scrum.org. And it's an amazing organization.
And if I may, just go back a bit to what you said about your time in secondary school. You said you were dyslexic, and apart from the fact that you discovered computers, you had a horrible experience. What made it horrible for you?
I think it was, there's no support network. There's nobody checking in on you, particularly at secondary school. At primary school, you have a teacher that you're in the same room. You've sort of got that. You're with the same kids, but you go, you go from one lesson to another lesson to another lesson. And if you're a little bit, well, for me, reading and writing was incredibly difficult. I could read and write at that point. I was about 9.5, 10 when I finally broke through. Thanks to an amazing teacher that worked with my primary school, but I was way behind. I was slower. And teachers didn't really. It was almost as though, and I'm sure education's very different now, and both my children are dyslexic, and they go to a special school that's designed around this. So I know that it's different for them. But the teaching was very much delivery. Without inspection and adaptation of the outcome, just to make it a bit agile for a second. So you'd go through all this stuff, and I wasn't able to write all the stuff down fast enough. I certainly wasn't able to process it. So because of that, it was pretty awful. I always felt that I was stupid. I was, and obviously I relied on humor, and I was a big lad, so I didn't have any bullying issues, but it was very, very challenging. And I found that I could be good at something with computers, and I sort of got it. I understood how to write, basic very quickly, and maybe even a little assembler. I knew how to configure machine. It just seemed natural. It certainly helped my confidence, which, maybe I'm a little too confident now, but definitely had an impact on my future life.
And that's awesome. And I'm sure that there are people who would be encouraged by what you've just said. So I wanted to dig in there. Thanks for sharing. Now, what about, what do you do when you're not working?
What do I do when I'm not working? Well, that's a hard question, gosh. So I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old and 2 boys. So, sometimes I'm refereeing wrestling matches. I'm definitely dealing with having to. I was late to life having children. I'm 52 and I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. I thought that, a single lifestyle a bachelor lifestyle in Boston, and, loving my work, writing books, doing this, traveling the world was going to survive. And then I met the most amazing girl, and who persuaded me that I needed to have children. And I thought, well, I really like you, so I better. And it's been an incredible adventure with these children. They have taught me so much. The most important thing I think they've taught me is patience. And it's making me a better human being. And many of those traits, just to bring it back to Agile for a second, are things that we need to build better into the way that we turn up at work. Because the project, I think it was called Aristotle, the Google big project, where they looked at the successful teams. They found a number of traits, but one of those traits that was so important was psychological safety, right? And that requires you to attend every interaction with a mindfulness, not of doing things that you want to do to yourself, which is that sort of golden rule, but that platinum rule: do unto others as they want to be done on. And I think that is so important and crucial. And it's something that I aspire to. I don't always succeed. every day as a human being, you know, whether it's at the checkout at the supermarket or whether it's waiting in line, particularly at the moment in an airport. And it is just, you know, something that I think in an agile team is so important, because that safety is so required to create that environment where transparency happens, to create that environment where you can have those honest conversations about what's happening next or what's happened previously, where you're running those retrospectives, where you're trying to really plan when there is not enough knowledge to plan. You know, those sort of things require that kind of environment to be successful. So, you know, yes, I spend my life either working or really spending it with my children at the moment because of the age they're at. I think it's helping me, the time I'm spending with my children is helping me be a better human being and be a better agilist.
There's something you said, you know, about psychological safety. And being kind, it just reminded me that, you know, of that, the need for also to be respectful of people, because when you're kind and you're showing people respect, that brings down the barriers and makes them, you know, more inclined to be open and to participate. What do you think about that? Would you say there's a link between respect and kindness? I know we're being philosophical right now.
Well, actually, yes, but no, it's incredibly practical as well. So I've written quite a lot about kindness because it's a trait that we as a community, our professional Scrum trainer community, manifests and lives. It's something that we actually interview for when you join our community. And the reason why we do that isn't because we're a bunch of hippies that just like kumbaya and want everybody to hold hands and be nice to each other. I mean, that would be great as well. And who doesn't like a good rendition of kumbaya? But it's a great song. But it's because we believe that kindness ultimately is beneficial to both parties, particularly the person that's being kind, because it creates, not only does it create levels of karma, but it creates that transparency. It creates that opportunity to learn that you may not get if you go in a very confrontational way. And people don't intentionally be confrontational, but it's so easy for it to happen. You know, it's so easy for you to question, because, you know, somebody says something, you're like, well, I don't agree with that. Now, and that instantly creates an environment or a connection that is, you know, confrontational. You're in this position, it spirals, blah blah blah. So, but you can instead of saying I don't agree with that, say, hey, well, that's interesting. Let me have a look into that. And you're inquisitive. And if you try to approach everything with that sort of like kindness model, and I don't mean always being nice. Nice is different to kind. Nice is like faking, I think, sometimes. You know, you know, it's funny. You don't have to be kind to be nice, but you have to be nice to be kind, if you understand what I mean. So you can fake niceness. Niceness is part of being kind. So, you know, if you approach it in the right way, where you care about people and you care about what they're bringing to the table, and you care about the environment that they're in, whether it's just simple things like checking in more frequently, you know, whether it's actually making time in this very scheduled life that we live now with Zoom call after Zoom call to check in with the team that or the person that you're talking to see how are they turning up today? How has their day been? And I think that's, you know, super, super important. The other important element of kindness that comes out is this helping others element. You know, my gran, God rest her soul, Lilian, she was a rock star on so many levels. And she used to say to me when I came home from school, particularly from elementary school or primary school, I think we call it in England, right? She'd say things like, not what have you done today? I mean, sometimes she said that, but she'd say, who have you helped? Who have you helped? I'll be like, and then she said it enough that I realized it's important. You know, it's important that that you spend time with others, help them in their tasks, you know, because I think you can learn so much and build those relationships, build that safety that is so important to really develop. We working in complex environments, right? That's the whole point of agility. True. Complex environments require people to collaborate. They require people to look at things in different ways. They really benefit from diversity of mind, diversity of experience, diversity of skill. And you bring that together, but you can only bring all these different parts together when you have an environment that allows for it. And traditional project management techniques, fabulous as they were for building bridges and tunnels and everything like that, didn't allow that. They don't encourage that. They encourage people to be focused, to be efficient, to be managing to that model. And I think we have to step away from that and work in a slightly different way, where kindness, psychological safety, trust, respect. You use the word respect, and I think it's, you know, obviously it's a Scrum value, but it's crucial to effectively allowing independent people with diverse perspectives to work together in an effective way. And to be honest, society doesn't have enough of that in general. I think we've definitely moved away from respect and trust. We don't trust in our governments. We don't trust in our institutions. We don't trust in our fellow human beings. And we've become very much focused on ourselves and our individual needs. And the reality is there's no such thing as a self-made person. You're only there because of the success of previous generations. As you drive to work in a car on a road that has been built by others, that's been funded by others, you know. So this idea that you're in it alone, and you know, is completely wrong. And I think sometimes we bring that to the work, and it creates an environment that is not as successful.
Thanks for that, Dave. I completely agree. Now, there are people, back to this project program word, that feel like, you know, the word project in Agile is a taboo, almost a swear word. What's your perspective on this?
I don't think it's a swear word. I don't think it's taboo. I think, you know, Mick's book is a fabulous book, and he's a fabulous person. But he was using it to emphasize the fact that, you know, that we have become too focused on this, you know, investment paradigm, this organization paradigm, this structural paradigm of the project, and that ultimately the idea of a product, this idea of a cohesive set of capabilities that's packaged in some way, that has a clear boundary, that has a clear set of customers, that has some clear value, is a much better way of aligning your people and your investments. And so he was emphasizing that, and obviously he emphasized the idea of value streams being the mechanism that we deliver value in this construct to these people in this packaging of products. And it's a great book, and I recommend everybody should read it.
I have mine here, yes.
Oh, well, that's good. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to be involved in the development of the book a little, working with Mick, providing a lot of feedback, and I think it's a great book. However, the idea of a project doesn't go away, and all of that work that we did, that organizations that I respect deeply, like the PMI, and you know, that even dare I say things like Prince 2, all of that work isn't wrong. It's just we need to look at it from a different lens. The idea that complex work is there changes certain things. The fact that requirements and understandings and appreciation of what we're doing emerges over time, that is just a truth, and that was true of projects as well. We just need to build in the mechanisms to be better able to deal with that. The fact that we would invest hundreds, if not thousands of hours planning things that ultimately fell apart when some underlying assumption changed, and then we'd create a change order to deal with the chaos that created. We need to step away from those ideas. Do we still have projects? I think yes. Sometimes you will have something that has put a man on, or hopefully it's not a man, hopefully it's a woman, but a woman on Mars. I don't trust men on. I think it'd be much more successful if it was a woman. But anyway, or put
Nicely
a person.
said, Dave.
Anyway, so putting that person on Mars is a project, right? It has a definitive, plan. It has an end goal that's very clearly undecided. It's very likely that we're going to build a series of products to support that. I don't think we need to get tied up so much on the words project and product. However, we really need to step back a little bit and look at, okay, like treating people as resources, breaking up teams and reforming teams continuously, treating people as fungible or whatever that is. They're just unrealistic. It's not nothing to do with project or product. They're just silly. You just can't deal with this. The fact that teams take time to form, the fact that, the most successful agile teams I've ever seen are teams that have a clear line of sight to the customer, clear understanding of what they're trying to do for that customer, have guardrails, have an enabling management structure that provides support to deliver that value to that customer. As long as you think about those things and you don't get so tied up with the dance or the routine of project management that you forget that, then I'm not concerned. There's this big thing about, should project managers be scrum masters? I don't know. It depends on the project manager.
And their skill sets,
sometimes project managers make very good product owners because they take real clear ownership of the outcomes and the value that's trying to be delivered. Sometimes, they make great scrum masters because they care very much about the flow of work, the team dynamics, the service to the organization, the service to the business, and they want to act in that way. And sometimes they just want to get stuff done and work as in a team as a developer on that increment. It doesn't, I don't know. People are like, because, and I think this is the fundamental problem. The thing that I see over and over again is the use of Agile in an industrial mass production, oil and mass production way of thinking about the world. So what they do is that it isn't Agile or project management that's at fault. It's the paradigm that's driving the use of Agile or the use of project management. You can do Agile in a very waterfall way, don't get me wrong, or a very industrial way. I almost don't want to use the word waterfall, but this idea of, maximizing efficiency. I mean, gosh, the word velocity has been synonymous with Agile forever, when ultimately it's got nothing to do with agility. It's a useful mechanism for a team to help them run a retrospective sometimes, but it isn't a mechanism that you use to plan, the capacity of your organization and all this sort of idea. What they're trying to do always is use an industrial, sort of mindset in a context that doesn't support an industrial mindset or a traditional mindset. And that drives me mad, because I see agility being used to deliver work rather than value. I see agility basically being missed, sort of like almost jimmied in, a crowbar into these massive projects and programs where you've got fixed scope, fixed budget at the start. They don't actually know what they're trying to achieve, but you've got all these contracts in place that describe all this stuff very detailed up front. And then they say, we're going to use Agile to do it. And you're like, okay, what happens if the first sprint uncovers the fact that the product goal was fundamentally flawed? Oh, well, we can't change that because the contract says. Well, hang on a minute. What are we in this business for? Are we actually trying to deliver value to customers and help them solve a particular problem to deliver? Or are we trying to do something else? And they're like, no, we're trying to deliver on the contract. But isn't the contract a mechanism that describes that? Maybe, but that's not why we're here. And that's when it starts going wrong, I think. That industrial mindset, that I just want, tell me what to do, give me a job, let me sit down, just give me that change order and I will start work. It's just wrong. And for certain types of project and certain types of product and certain types of problem, it probably works really well if we're building the 17th bridge, or we're or we're, doing those sort of things. But the reality is, in the digital age, that most knowledge workers, who are the people that really benefit from Agile the most, that aren't working in that way. They're working with very changeable environments, very changeable customer understanding, very, it's a little bit more complex.
True. And what you're saying reminds me of my conversation with Dave Snowden. He's known for his work on complexity theory, and yeah, exactly. And if it's in a complex adaptive environment, you need to be agile. But if it's a complicated problem or a simple problem, so complicated is really about breaking it down into a series of simple problems, but it's still sequential and predictable. You could use the traditional waterfall method, because nothing is going to change. It's really about putting all those pieces together to get to a known end state. And so I am of the same mindset as you, in terms of it's all about the context and understanding what exactly I'm trying to achieve, what's of value to the customer, and how much of it do we know, and how much learning do we have to do as we get there.
Exactly. I'm obviously not anywhere near as smart as somebody like a Dave Snowden, who just, I think he has forgotten more things than I've ever understood. But he's an amazing thought leader in this space. But the challenge, and he talks a little bit about this sometimes, or I think he does, is that we don't always know what's complicated or complex, or like the amount of unknown. And this is the classic sort of entrepreneurs aren't necessarily working in complexity, they're working in unknown. But the nature of unknown is really tricky, because you may discover that something that you thought was known is not known, and then you have to change how you approach it. So the reason in Scrum what we do is we deliver frequently, and that ultimately, and we deliver the most valuable things, or the things that will give us the most value. Thus, that uncovers those misunderstandings early in the process.
Completely true. And just to build on what you said, in terms of our understanding or realizing that your product goal was wrong, you're working on the wrong thing, sometimes you might have to also kind of say goodbye to the project or pull the plug. It depends.
Yeah. And that's incredibly hard. Sorry, just to lean into that. It's very hard, because you've got people that are there, and you've invested time. And, there's the sort of classic fallacy of sunk cost, all that stuff. But the reality is, it's not a fallacy of psychological sort of like sunk energy. You've invested all this time and money and effort and emotion to get where you're at, and then you're realizing it's wrong. It's incredibly hard to step away from that. And so what you do, and you see this with startups all the time, is you pivot, but you don't really pivot. What you're doing actually is trying to find a way to get all that investment that you've spent to be useful, to deliver some value, and whether it's repackaging or whatever, so that you can say, oh, that's okay, when actually, and you can spend as much time doing that as you did the original thing, and now you're even worse, in a worse situation, and it's hard.
Yes, completely agree. So there's something you said about, you gave an example of people doing, if I will use your term, Water-Scrum-Fall in their delivery. And sometimes, they go into detailed requirements, specification, and they write an ironclad contract that would, kind of specify all these requirements have to be met. And whilst from the delivery perspective, in terms of the teams who actually do the work, they get it, they want to be agile, but it's always these constraints. And whenever we, as an agile coach, you go into the root of the matter, it's the typical root causes of why there is this inflexibility is either, the leadership and or, the business or their clients not wanting, having that traditional expectations. Any advice on how to effectively deal with this sort of blocker?
I think it's very difficult, particularly when you use it, when it's like outsourced, or you've got a, that sort of, it's contract based as opposed to internal in terms of commitments. So it's not budgeted, it's actually contracted. And when that happens, it's very difficult, because, you've got the deal because you know how to do stuff and you've done it before and you've got all that experience. So the customer, of course, says, well, because you've done it before and you've invested all this experience, you must tell us exactly what it is that we're going to do. And the reality is the customer themselves doesn't know what they want, really. And until you actually get into the process, it's very difficult. I think one of the big things that's going to happen over the next few years, and we're starting to see some of this with things like beyond budgeting, the new procurement contract models that the US is perpetualizing with 18F, and the work of the central government. It was sort of stopped during the previous administration, but it's now back. How do you do agile contract management? What does it mean? Speaking from personal use, of external companies to do work for Scrum.org, we pay for sprints. We define a clear product goal that we evaluate continuously, that's measurable. We have a product owner from Scrum.org embedded in the Scrum team, even if the Scrum team, or in the Scrum team. So of course, if the product owner, they are part of the Scrum team, but even if the Scrum team is predominantly a third party. So we do things like that to, and because you can't just fund one sprint at a time. It's very, these people have got to pay mortgages, and they've got payroll to hit. So you have to negotiate a number of sprints that you would do it, that allows them the flexibility to manage those constraints, whilst being realistic that at the end of a sprint review, you may discover so much stuff, or even during a sprint, that questions everything and requires a fundamentally shifting of the backlog, maybe a change to the backlog, assuming that the objective and the product goal is still valid. So putting those things in place, having those honest conversations and partnership conversations with the client is crucial. Service companies that serve Scrum.org are a little bit luckier, because we actually come at that from we know that we don't know what we want, whereas most clients, it's a lot harder to get them to say that. We know what we'd like to achieve. So the other thing that's important, and I think OKRs are maybe part of this, we have a thing called EBM, evidence-based management, which is a sort of like an agile version of OKRs. The OKRs, and if defining the outcomes that you're trying to achieve and how you're going to measure them up front, validating them continuously, because it's possible you're wrong, but it's a much less of a scary prospect than not describing anything at all, or just having some very highfalutin goal. So getting very clear and precise in what you're trying to achieve, and actually investing the time up front to work out what that means, and getting everybody on the same page around that, can really help solve those problems long term, because you build to that, and that ultimately becomes the true north that everybody's working to. So when you have those moments of, oh, that's not what we thought, then that's okay, because you're validating against at least something. You have some level of structure in all of this.
Yeah, so let's get to some other questions. What books have you, read that you would say have impacted the way your outlook on or view on the subject of agility, or anything else? What would you recommend to the audience?
So, I mean, the books that really changed my life around thinking about this in a different way, there was a few. The one that actually is nothing to do with Agile that made me step back from the way I was looking at the world was Thank You for Being Late, by Thomas Friedman. That book really sort of like reinforced the fact that the world is incredibly complex, and is, he's famous for the world is flat, the sort of like global supply chain thing, which we're all very aware of, and it's fundamentally having a huge impact now on prices and inflation and the like, because it's been such a mess over the last 2.5 years. So that changed my outlook with respect to the world that I'm living in, which I thought was quite interesting. In terms of straight agility,
Yeah.
you know, I'll be honest. There's the Pocket Guide for Scrum taught me professional Scrum. That's Gunther Verem's book. That I'd never really thought about Scrum in that way. And then I have to plug the series, the professional Scrum series from Addison, where's Pearson now? Sorry, there's some great books in there. Zombie Scrum is absolutely fabulous. And actually coming out on the 17th of June is a new book about leadership, professional agile leader, the leader's journey towards growing mature agile teams and organizations. I just read that, so I did not remember it, but it's by three people I adore. Ron Eringa, Kurt Bittner, and Lorenz Bonema. They're awesome, you know, had lots of leadership positions, written a great book. I wrote an inspired forward, just in case anybody's checking that. You know, that confidence thing certainly came back after middle school, right? But that's a really interesting book that talks about the issue that you highlighted earlier, that leadership needs. We've spent 25 years teaching Scrum to teams. We need to spend the next probably 60 years teaching Scrum to leaders and trying to help. And it's not just Scrum, it's Agile. Hence the reason why this isn't just about Scrum, you know, whether it's Kanban, whether it's Flow, whether it's Spotify model, whether it's whatever. But the essence of that, you know, empiricism, self-management, you know, the continuous improvement, the importance of discipline, the importance of being customer-centric, the value of outcomes and measures against outcomes, the value of community and support networks, you know, all of this stuff is crucial. And we need to start putting that thing, you know, whether it's business agility, whether you call it business agility, you know, all organizations, I think the pandemic proved this, need to be more agile in responding to their market, to their customers, to their employees, and to the society that they contribute to. We get that. You know, but leadership needs to change, and that's not a you're wrong and awful now sort of old leadership bad. No, it's just the reality is the world has changed, and the more mindful leaders step back and say, oh, what do I have to do differently now? My entire team is remote. My work is hard to plan. The fact that we, you know, our funding cycles have changed, our investment models have changed, you know, stepping back a little bit. So this Professional Agile Leader book, I do recommend. Obviously, I had the benefit of reading it before it became a book, and it's very, very good and fun to read.
Awesome. We will put the list of books and links to them in the show notes. So thank you for that. Now, is there anything you'd like to ask, you know, of the audience?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I mean, my only sort of like, if it's sort of closing, sort of, if we've unfortunately come to the end of our time together, and I did waffle on, so I apologize for using up far too much of it. I guess the question and we talked a little bit about this, but you know, there is a propensity in our industry, like every industry and every moment and every movement, to become very inward looking, to become very like, my way is better than every other way, you know. And obviously I'm very into Scrum, and I apologize, I accept that I am, but I'm not arrogant enough to believe that it is the only way of solving complex problems. I'm also not arrogant to believe that it is sufficient. So, you know, I love the work of the Lean UX, Agile UX. We loved it so much. We worked with Jeff and Josh to build a class together. I love the work of Daniel Vacanti and in professional Kanban and the Kanban community in general. I love the work of the professional coaching organizations and what they're really doing to help me be a better human being, dare I say. You know, the point is, as you sit at this moment in time, you as an Agile practitioner have the opportunity to draw on many different disciplines and many different experts to really help to create that environment that can allow agility to thrive and value to be delivered. And I think the only thing that's getting in the way of you doing that, or the only thing that was getting in the way of me doing that, and it still does sometimes, is hubris, arrogance, and just a lack of, I don't know, not being willing to step out of my comfort zone and accept that my predefined ideas and my experience, my diversity that I bring isn't necessarily always right, and to be more humble and to be more kind. I know it's a country song, humble and kind, right? Which I'm, obviously I live in America, so I have to like country music. It's mandatory. But I think that sort of, if you can be a little bit kinder and to do what my gran asks, right? Not what did you do today, but who did you help? What did you learn? And how are you going to be better tomorrow? If we can do all of those things, then not only are our projects and teams and products better, but our lives better, and maybe society could be a little bit better.
Those are great words, Dave. Thank you so much for those. One last thing. Are you on social media? How can people get in touch with you?
You can always dave.west@scrum.org if you want to ping me on this thing called email. If you're under 30, it's this thing that old people like. It's called email. If you're younger and cooler, I do not have a TikTok account. I don't totally know what it is. My son says we need it. I'm not totally sure that we do, but it's not about clocks as well. Who knew that? What was all that about?
Apple isn't a fruit.
It's about fruit. How annoying is that as well? Anyway, and so many misconceptions in the world, right? Anyway, but and M&Ms aren't Smarties. I know, I get it. But anyway, sorry. The David J. West is my Twitter handle. But whatever. LinkedIn. You can always find me on LinkedIn. Just do davewestscrum.org and you will find me on LinkedIn. Love connecting, love talking about this stuff, maybe a little too much. Another saying that my gran used to say, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. Shame you never used it like that, David. I was like, yes, Gran, I know. Yeah. She also didn't, by the way, just for the record. Anyway.
Oh gosh, your grandma Lilian sounds like she was one awesome woman. Yeah.
Rockstar.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. It's been a pleasure, and I thoroughly enjoyed having this conversation with you. Actually, more learning from you, and I hope sometime you'll be back again for another conversation.
I would love that. Thank you for your audience. Thank you for taking the time today. I appreciate it. So thank you, and let's stay in touch, and I hope that we'll see maybe in person again soon.
That would be wonderful. That's all we have for now. Thanks for listening. If you like this show, do subscribe at www.agileinnovationleaders.com. That's agileinnovationleaders.com, or your favorite podcast provider. Also share with friends, and do leave a review on iTunes. This would help others find this show. I'd also love to hear from you, so please drop me an email at ola@agileinnovationleaders.com. Take care and God bless.